Have you ever been welcomed to your new ranch by a woman holding a camera, accusing your fence of endangering national security, and then calling the cops because your grass wasn't the correct height? Yeah, that happened. My name's Graham, and what started as a peaceful retreat for my wife's cancer recovery turned into a bizarre HOA circus starring the queen of petty, Melinda. She doesn't run the neighborhood, she rules it one complaint form at a time. But let's just say she picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. Ever dealt with a HOA nightmare or a neighborhood Karen? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. This one's gonna hit close to home. When Eleanor and I first pulled up to our dream ranch, the morning sun was painting everything golden. 50 acres of pure Texas countryside, rolling hills as far as the eye could see, and most importantly, silence. After months of chemotherapy appointments and sterile hospital rooms, my wife needed this. The clean air, the space, the peace we'd saved 30 years to afford. I'd taken my government pension and bought us paradise, or so I thought. Eleanor sat on our new porch that first morning, wrapped in her favorite quilt, watching the sunrise with tears in her eyes. "It's perfect, Graham," she whispered. "It's exactly what I dreamed of." For 2 weeks, we lived like we were the only people on Earth. I learned how to fix fences, Eleanor planted a small garden, and we watched the deer come drink from our pond every evening. Then I noticed the houses. About half a mile down the road sat Sunset Ridge Estates, a perfect little community where every lawn was cut to exactly the same height, every mailbox painted the same shade of blue, and every driveway pressure washed to pristine perfection. The houses looked like someone had copy-pasted the same design 40 times. I didn't think much of it until she showed up. I was carrying lumber for a new gate when a white Range Rover with the license plate COM1 tie pulled into my driveway. Out stepped a woman in a bright pink blazer that could have been seen from space. Her hair styled like she was about to anchor the evening news. She had a professional camera setup that would make a documentary filmmaker jealous. "Hi there, I'm Melinda Caraway, and I'm here to welcome you to our little community." Her smile was so forced it looked painful, but her eyes were scanning everything like a building inspector looking for violations. She held her camera at the ready, finger hovering over the record button. "I run the High Wind Weekly Update, where I keep everyone informed about what's happening in our neighborhood. I just wanted to chat about community standards and property values, you know, the little things that keep our area so special." Her voice was sweet as pie, but there was steel underneath. Eleanor joined us on the porch, and I could see her instinctively step closer to me. "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone friendly. "What can I help you with?" That's when Melinda's mask slipped just a little. She gestured toward my lumber pile, my work truck, the natural landscape I refused to manicure. "Well, you see, when people invest in a community like Sunset Ridge, they expect certain standards. Your ranch, while I'm sure it's lovely for you, does impact the visual appeal of our entire area. Property values, you understand." She pulled out a tablet and started scrolling through what looked like a presentation. "The Homeowners Association has guidelines about structures, landscaping, even vehicle parking. Now, I know you're not technically part of our HOA, but as neighbors, we hope you'll consider the broader community impact." Eleanor's face went pale. She'd been through enough battles with cancer, she didn't need a war with the neighbors, too. I kept my voice calm, drawing on 3 decades of dealing with difficult people in government work. "I appreciate your concern, Melinda, but this is private property. We're not part of your HOA, and we're well within county regulations." Her smile got tighter. "Oh, I'm sure you are, technically. But sometimes being a good neighbor means going beyond what's just technically legal, don't you think?" She raised her camera again, this time recording openly. "The thing is, Graham," can I call you Graham? "When one property affects everyone else's investment, well, that becomes everyone's business." She filmed our property for a solid 5 minutes, narrating under her breath about concerning developments and community impact assessments. After Melinda finally left, Eleanor and I sat in our kitchen, staring at each other. "What was that about?" Eleanor asked, her voice shaky. I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her lavender shampoo, trying to project calm I didn't feel. "Probably nothing, honey, just an overly concerned neighbor." But something in my gut told me this wasn't over. I'd seen enough workplace conflicts to recognize when someone was building a case. That evening, I stood at our bedroom window, watching Melinda's Range Rover parked at the property line. She had her camera out again, filming our house as the sun set behind it. She stood there for nearly an hour, narrating like a journalist covering an active crime scene. At one point, I heard her say the word "unsafe," loud enough to carry through the still evening air. That night, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I was worried. Not about myself, but about Eleanor. She'd been through so much already, and the stress in her eyes when Melinda left was heartbreaking. As I tucked her into bed, she grabbed my hand. "Graham, I just want to be left alone. I want to sit on our porch and watch the sun rise and not worry about anything else." I kissed her forehead, promising everything would be fine, but as I closed my eyes that night, I could hear Melinda's Range Rover driving slowly past our house again. The headlights swept across our bedroom wall 3 times before she finally drove away. The next morning, I was installing a basic security fence around our property when I heard the unmistakable sound of a police siren. Deputy Sheriff Brad Wilson's patrol car pulled up my driveway, and I could see the confusion on his face before he even got out. Behind him, like a director following her lead actor, came Melinda in her Range Rover. She hopped out with her camera, already recording. "Good morning, sir," Deputy Wilson said, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm responding to a complaint about suspicious construction activity. I'm sorry to bother you, but I have to follow up on all reports." His tone told me everything. This wasn't his first rodeo with Melinda. Before I could even respond, Melinda was positioning herself for the perfect camera angle. "I'm here for transparency and community safety," she announced. "Officer Wilson, as you can see, there's clearly unauthorized construction happening here. I've done my research, and this fence height exceeds county regulations by at least 6 inches. Her phone was pointed straight at me, already live streaming, her comments scrolling so fast I could catch phrases like "danger to kids" and "lawless ranch" before she turned the screen. The residents of Sunset Ridge deserve to know when potentially illegal activity is happening right next door to their children. Deputy Wilson looked like he wanted to disappear into his patrol car. "Ma'am, I need to speak with the property owner first," he said diplomatically. I walked over calmly, work gloves still on, trying to project the kind of steady professionalism I'd learned in decades of government work. "Officer Wilson, I'm Graham Redford. I own this property, and I'd be happy to show you the permits for this fence installation." Melinda's camera immediately swung toward me, and I could see her excitement spike. This was content gold for her. A confrontation with law enforcement. "The fence meets all county specifications, and I have the approved building permits right here in my truck." Deputy Wilson reviewed my paperwork while Melinda provided running commentary for her audience about concerning patterns. When Wilson confirmed everything was legal and proper, I watched Melinda's face fall for just a moment before she pivoted. "Well, Officer Wilson, what about the noise complaints, the environmental impact, the precedent this sets for other property owners?" She was grasping now, clearly hoping to manufacture some kind of violation. Deputy Wilson's patience was wearing thin. "Ma'am, this is a legal construction project on private property. There's no violation here." But Melinda wasn't done. "I think it's important for the community to understand what's happening here," she said, stepping closer to get a better camera angle of the fence. That's when she made her first real mistake. She stepped over the property line. I quietly took out my phone and snapped a photo. If someone was going to document everything, I figured I should too. After Deputy Wilson left, looking relieved to escape the drama, Melinda spent another 20 minutes filming my property from every angle. She narrated her video like she was exposing a major conspiracy. "As you can see, the new neighbor continues his construction despite community concerns. We'll need to explore other options to protect our property values and neighborhood standards." She walked the entire perimeter of my fence line, occasionally stepping onto my property to get better shots. Each time, I documented it. Eleanor watched from our kitchen window, and I could see her stress levels rising. When I came inside, she was sitting at our table with her head in her hands. "Graham, I can't handle confrontation right now. The chemo makes me so tired, and stress just makes everything worse." That evening, I sat down at my computer and did what any good government worker does: research. Melinda Caraway had quite the digital footprint. Her High Wind Weekly Update channel had 847 subscribers and featured dozens of videos about neighborhood concerns. Video titles included "New Neighbor Red Flags," "Protecting Our Property Values," and "When HOAs Fail Us." She'd been documenting neighbors for months, building cases against people for everything from lawn length to car parking. In one video from 6 months ago, she proudly announced that she'd helped relocate a family whose teenage son played music too loud. The comments section was a mix of support from her followers and criticism from people calling her a busybody. The really interesting part was what I found in the county records. This wasn't Melinda's first rodeo. Over the past 2 years, she'd filed formal complaints against 3 other neighbors in Sunset Ridge. Each case followed the same pattern: initial friendly contact, escalating demands for compliance with her vision of community standards, then a barrage of official complaints until the targeted family either complied completely or moved away. She was systematic, methodical, and apparently successful, but she'd never dealt with someone who'd spent 3 decades navigating bureaucratic systems for a living. As I closed my laptop that night, Eleanor was already asleep, exhausted from her treatment and the day's stress. I made a mental note to start keeping detailed records of every interaction with our helpful neighbor. The next morning brought our first official county notice: potential building code violations reported, requiring an inspection within 10 business days. I stared at the letter, impressed despite myself. Melinda had escalated beyond police complaints to county bureaucracy overnight. She was more sophisticated than I'd given her credit for. When I showed Eleanor the letter, I watched the color drain from her face. "What does this mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means our neighbor is playing hardball," I replied, folding the letter carefully. "But don't worry, honey, I know how to play this game too." What Melinda didn't know was that she'd just challenged someone who'd made a career out of navigating exactly these kinds of bureaucratic battles. Game on. The next week felt like being caught in a bureaucratic blizzard. Letters arrived daily from multiple agencies, all referencing citizen complaints and video evidence of potential violations. Melinda had clearly spent time researching every possible agency that might have jurisdiction over any aspect of ranch operations. She was casting a wide net, hoping something would stick. Eleanor sat at our kitchen table one morning, staring at the pile of official correspondence. "Graham, what if they find something wrong? What if we have to pay fines? What if they make us move?" Her hands were shaking, and I realized the stress was affecting her more than I'd understood. The county inspector arrived on Tuesday morning, precisely at 9 o'clock, just as Melinda pulled up in her Range Rover with her camera set up. She had a folder thick enough to be a doctoral dissertation, and the kind of confidence that comes from believing you're absolutely right. The inspector, a tired-looking man, glanced between my normal ranch setup and Melinda's production with obvious confusion. "Sir, I'm here to investigate reported building and environmental violations," he said. "I have to admit, this is one of the more comprehensive complaint packages I've received." Melinda immediately launched into what she clearly considered her star performance. "Officer, thank you so much for taking these community concerns seriously," Melinda began, pulling out her tablet and starting a presentation that would have impressed corporate executives. As you can see in slide 1, the fence height exceeds optimal visual harmony standards for this area. Slide 2 shows the environmental impact of livestock on local water tables. Slide 3 demonstrates how agricultural operations affect property values within a 1-mile radius. She had charts, graphs, and edited video footage. The inspector looked increasingly bewildered as Melinda clicked through her presentation. "Ma'am, I just need to verify that the construction meets county code requirements," he interrupted gently. But Melinda was just getting started. "The precedent concerns are significant," she continued, advancing to slide 7. "If we allow agricultural operations without proper community input, where does it end? What about noise ordinances? What about traffic patterns from feed deliveries? What about the impact on children's safety?" She had clearly spent hours, maybe days, preparing this presentation. The inspector glanced at me with what looked like sympathy. "Sir, do you have your permits and inspection records available?" I handed him a neat folder containing every document from the original purchase to the most recent building permits. Everything was legal, properly filed, and completely up to code. After 2 hours of Melinda's presentation and the inspector's methodical inspection, the result was exactly what I'd expected. No violations found. "Everything appears to be in order," he told us both. "The construction meets all county requirements, and agricultural operations are specifically permitted for properties of this size." Melinda's face went through several expressions: surprise, disappointment, then determination. "What about cumulative impact assessments? What about community input requirements? Surely there's a process for neighbors to voice legitimate concerns." The inspector packed up his clipboard with the weary air of someone who'd dealt with this before. "Ma'am, property owners have the right to use their land within legal parameters. I can't cite violations that don't exist." After the inspector left, I found myself genuinely curious about Melinda's background. This level of organization and persistence suggested someone with experience in research and presentation. A little digging revealed she'd worked in marketing and communications before her divorce. She understood how to build narratives, how to present information persuasively, and how to use bureaucratic systems to achieve her goals. The problem was, she'd picked the wrong target. While she was building her case against me, I was building my own case against her. Every interaction, every complaint, every video she made was going into a file that would make any lawyer proud. But what really made me pause wasn't just her persistence. It was something I stumbled across completely by accident. Buried in a local newspaper archive from a neighboring county, there it was. A short piece detailing a lawsuit against a certain Melinda C., accused of manipulating surveillance footage in an HOA dispute. The case had been sealed, but the paper trail was enough. She'd been forced to resign and relocate. That neighbor had fled to escape lawsuits, and now she was doing it again, only this time she'd picked the wrong ranch. Eleanor's chemotherapy session that afternoon was interrupted 3 times by phone calls about violations that didn't exist. I watched my wife, already exhausted from treatment, try to explain to county officials that we were just trying to live peacefully on our own property. When she hung up after the 3rd call, she was crying. "Graham, I can't do this. I don't have the energy to fight. I just want to sit on our porch and watch the sunset without worrying about what that woman is going to do next." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my old work files and started researching harassment laws, specifically the kind of systematic campaign Melinda was waging. What I found in my research was illuminating, but the real discovery came by accident. While searching for information about Melinda's previous HOA involvement, I stumbled across an old newspaper archive from a neighboring county. There it was, a brief article about a harassment lawsuit where Melinda had been accused of editing surveillance footage to create false evidence against neighbors. The case had been settled quietly, with Melinda agreeing to resign from that HOA. She'd done this before, and she'd been legally forced to stop. Now I understood why she'd moved to Sunset Ridge. She was running from her previous harassment campaign that had gone too far. I stayed up late that night, reading through depositions and court records, remembering how satisfying it had been to see justice served in similar cases during my government career. Melinda had no idea she was recreating a playbook I'd already seen and defeated before. The next morning brought an emergency HOA meeting notice in our mailbox. Urgent community safety discussion, scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The notice was professionally printed, complete with Sunset Ridge letterhead and Melinda's signature as HOA president. The agenda included discussion of new neighbor impact on community standards and voting on protective measures for property values. I showed Eleanor the notice, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I saw something other than worry in her eyes. I saw anger. "Graham, she's trying to turn the entire neighborhood against us. We haven't done anything wrong and she's making us sound like criminals." I folded the notice carefully and added it to my growing documentation file. "Don't worry, honey. I think it's time we attended one of Melinda's meetings." Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that makes Texas beautiful. I helped Eleanor into our truck, and we drove the half-mile to Sunset Ridge Community Center, passing perfectly manicured lawns and identical driveways. The community center parking lot looked like a political rally. Cars everywhere, people gathering in small groups, and in the center of it all, Melinda's setup with a professional backdrop, reading, "Protecting High-Wind Property Values." She was dressed like a news anchor, red blazer, pearl necklace, hair styled to perfection, clearly ready for her starring role. More than 30 neighbors had shown up, some looking curious, others concerned, a few clearly reluctant to be there at all. I recognized several faces from our brief interactions around town: the grocery store clerk, the bank teller, families we'd waved to during our evening walks. Now they were all staring at Eleanor and me like we were the main attraction at a zoo. Melinda stepped onto a makeshift podium, complete with HOA-branded banners and a microphone clipped to her lapel like she was about to deliver a State of the Union address. A mini American flag flapped awkwardly behind her. "Thank you all for coming to this urgent community discussion. As your HOA president, I felt it was crucial that we address the situation that's developing right next door to our beautiful community." She gestured toward a large screen displaying what she called her impact assessment presentation. The presentation was masterful. I had to give her credit for that. She'd taken normal ranch activities and presented them as threats to community safety and property values. Melinda flashed slide after slide like a lawyer on caffeine, bold red charts, scary-sounding headlines, and out-of-context photos of our barn during construction. It was less a presentation and more a visual trial. I could see some neighbors frowning, unsure whether they were watching facts or fiction. As you can see, agricultural operations within 1 mile of residential communities can significantly affect home values, air quality, and noise levels. Eleanor squeezed my hand as neighbors around us started murmuring with concern. But Melinda's real talent was reading the room and adjusting her message accordingly. When she sensed skepticism, she pivoted to financial concerns. I know everyone here has invested their life savings in their homes. These are our retirement funds, our children's college funds, our financial security. When property values drop, we all suffer. Eleanor stood up slowly, voice trembling. We're just trying to survive this. But Melinda raised one hand dramatically. Please, let's stay on topic. This is about property values, not personal issues. When she saw nods of agreement from the crowd, she pushed harder. The question isn't whether we like our neighbors. I'm sure they're lovely people. The question is whether we can afford to let one property owner's choices affect everyone else's financial future. She presented a formal vote. Residents could request that the new neighbors voluntarily modify their property use to align with community standards. I almost raised my hand, not to vote, but to call out the circus for what it was. But I held back. This wasn't the stage for my rebuttal. No, that would come later, much later, when the whole show came crashing down. During the question and answer period, I watched Melinda work the crowd like a seasoned politician. When one neighbor asked if we'd been approached diplomatically first, Melinda had video evidence of our uncooperative response to reasonable community requests. When another neighbor wondered about property rights, she had statistics about community standards increasing everyone's property values. She was systematic, persuasive, and unfortunately effective. Melinda didn't even wait for discussion. All in favor, hands went up too fast. I counted. 23. Only 7 dared oppose. Eleanor and I sat quietly in the back, taking notes and trying to look non-threatening. After the formal meeting ended, the real drama began. Neighbors approached us with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. One elderly woman quietly said, "This feels familiar," but wouldn't elaborate when I asked what she meant. Eleanor tried to explain that we were just trying to live peacefully while she underwent cancer treatment, but I could see the exhaustion in her voice. We left feeling like we had been tried and convicted in silence. The real impact became clear over the next few days. Eleanor's weekly grocery shopping trip turned into a gauntlet of cold shoulders and whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by. Neighbors who had smiled and waved before now looked away or found sudden urgent business elsewhere. The pharmacist, who had always been friendly during Eleanor's prescription pickups, was suddenly formal and distant. I watched my wife, already weakened by chemotherapy, deal with social isolation on top of everything else. One evening, she came home from the grocery store and just sat in our truck for 10 minutes before coming inside. "Graham, they look at me like I'm the enemy. I'm just trying to buy groceries, and they act like I'm contagious." That night, I went through my old files more carefully. What the elderly woman had said, "This feels familiar," stuck with me. I pulled up county records and found exactly what I was looking for. 3 families had moved out of Sunset Ridge in the past 2 years, all following complaints filed by Melinda Caraway. The Hendersons left after 6 months of disputes about their teenage son's band practice. The Williams family moved after Melinda organized a campaign against their home business. The Johnsons relocated following a battle over their vegetable garden that allegedly violated aesthetic standards. Each case followed the same pattern: initial friendly contact, escalating demands, community pressure, bureaucratic complaints, then ultimate relocation. I was starting to understand that Melinda wasn't just a difficult neighbor. She was running a systematic operation to control every aspect of her community. She'd turned the HOA into her personal enforcement mechanism and used community meetings, like political rallies, to manufacture consensus for her agenda. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was just another suburban property owner who would fold under pressure. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd spent 30 years navigating exactly these kinds of conflicts for a living. As I closed the files that night, I realized I'd found something that changed everything. Legal precedent from a case I'd personally worked on. A case that was about to become very relevant to our situation. The next morning brought another official letter, this one from the county commissioner's office requesting voluntary compliance with community harmony standards. I read it twice, impressed by Melinda's escalation strategy. She was systematically working through every level of local government, building an official paper trail that would support her narrative. But as I filed the letter with all the others, I couldn't help smiling, because buried in my old case files was State of Texas versus Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association, a case I'd supervised 5 years ago involving the exact same harassment tactics Melinda was using now. The defendant in that case had been forced to pay significant damages and legal fees. I was starting to think our neighbor might be about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being persistent and being legally liable for harassment. On the drive home, Eleanor stared out the window, silent. Then, barely a whisper, "I've fought cancer with more dignity than this." Monday morning started quietly enough, but by noon it was clear Melinda had escalated to a new level. Driving home from Eleanor's chemotherapy appointment, I noticed bright yellow signs planted along the road near our ranch entrance. "Protect our children," in bold red letters, with smaller text about community safety first. The signs were professionally made and strategically placed to be visible from our driveway. Eleanor saw them at the same time I did. "Graham, what does that even mean? Protect children from what? We don't have anything dangerous here." Her voice was shaky, and I could see the stress was affecting her more than the chemotherapy at this point. By that evening, Melinda had organized what looked like a full-scale petition drive. She went door to door through Sunset Ridge with a clipboard, professional camera equipment, and her now familiar rehearsed talking points. From our porch, I could see her presenting documents to neighbors, filming their responses, and building what appeared to be a comprehensive case for community action. Eleanor sat wrapped in her quilt, watching the performance with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. "She's making this her full-time job," Eleanor observed. "How does someone have this much time and energy to spend on harassing neighbors?" I was wondering the same thing, but I was also taking detailed notes about everything I witnessed. Tuesday brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. Eleanor had insisted on doing her own grocery shopping. Maintaining independence was important to her sense of dignity during treatment. I should have gone with her, but she'd been so determined to handle normal activities on her own. She came home 2 hours later, pale and shaking, barely able to tell me what had happened. I was in the produce section, just buying apples, when Melinda appeared with her camera. She started filming me and demanding answers about why we were endangering community children with agricultural hazards. Eleanor's voice broke as she continued. People started gathering around, some filming with their phones, and I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't handle everyone staring at me like I was some kind of criminal. The full story emerged slowly. Melinda had cornered Eleanor in the grocery store's produce section, confronting her on camera about our ranch's impact on child safety in the community. She demanded Eleanor explain why we wouldn't be reasonable neighbors and modify our property use. Eleanor, already weakened from chemotherapy and overwhelmed by the public confrontation, had tried to explain that we just wanted to live peacefully while she recovered from cancer treatment. But Melinda had pressed harder, asking why Eleanor's personal health problems should take priority over community safety concerns. That's when Eleanor's stress response kicked in: rapid breathing, chest pain, dizziness, and the terrifying feeling that she couldn't get enough air. A crowd had gathered as Eleanor struggled with what was clearly a panic attack. Instead of helping, several people filmed the incident while Melinda continued her questioning. Eleanor collapsed against the produce display, gasping for breath, and finally someone called for medical assistance. She wasn't just suffocating from a panic attack, she was drowning in humiliation, in betrayal by strangers with phones, and in the realization that even her sickness couldn't buy her peace. The paramedics arrived within minutes, checking Eleanor's vitals and determining she was having a severe stress response rather than a heart attack. As they loaded her onto a stretcher, Melinda actually filmed the ambulance loading process, narrating to her camera about the emotional manipulation tactics some people use to avoid community accountability. I arrived at the hospital to find Eleanor hooked up to monitors, exhausted and humiliated. That night, as Eleanor slept under mild sedation, I sat beside her hospital bed and made a decision that would change everything. For weeks, I'd been trying to handle this situation diplomatically, hoping reason would prevail. I documented everything, filed appropriate responses, and tried to be the better person. But watching my wife, who was already fighting for her life against cancer, being terrorized by a neighbor's power games was my breaking point. I'd spent 30 years in government work learning how to navigate bureaucratic systems and legal processes. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. I spent the rest of that night in the hospital cafeteria with my laptop, researching harassment laws, civil rights violations, and legal precedents for systematic campaigns of intimidation. What I found was encouraging. Texas law provided strong protections against exactly the kind of behavior Melinda was exhibiting: systematic harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, abuse of legal processes, and violation of privacy rights. She'd been building a case against us for weeks, but she'd also been building a case against herself. Every video, every complaint, every public confrontation was documented evidence of harassment. Eleanor was released the next morning with instructions to avoid stress and continue her cancer treatment without additional complications. As we drove home, she was quieter than I'd ever seen her. Finally, she spoke. "Graham, I just wanted some peace in whatever time I have left. I wanted to sit on our porch and watch the sun rise and not worry about anything else." She turned to look at me with tears in her eyes. I can't fight her and fight cancer at the same time. I don't have the strength for both battles. I pulled over and held her while she cried, promising that she wouldn't have to fight anyone. I would handle Melinda Caraway, and I would handle her permanently. That afternoon, I received notification that Melinda had filed a police report claiming I had made violent threats toward community members during the grocery store incident. The report alleged that I had called her personally and threatened retaliation for her legitimate community safety concerns. The problem with that allegation was simple. I had been at the hospital with Eleanor during the time Melinda claimed I called her. I had hospital security footage, medical staff witnesses, and credit card records placing me exactly where I said I was. Melinda had just made her first major tactical error, filing a false police report with an easily disproven timeline. Deputy Wilson came to the house that evening to follow up on the complaint. He looked even more uncomfortable than usual. "Mr. Redford, I have to ask about this phone call allegation. Can you account for your whereabouts yesterday between 2 and 4 p.m.? I handed him copies of Eleanor's hospital records, the medical incident report, and the security camera timestamps showing my presence in the hospital during the alleged phone call. Wilson reviewed the documents and shook his head. "Sir, I'm going to be honest with you. This is the 15th complaint call I've responded to involving your neighbor in the past 6 months. The pattern is concerning." He couldn't say more officially, but his message was clear. Melinda's credibility was becoming a problem for law enforcement, too. That night, I made a decision that would end this harassment campaign permanently. I called a number I hadn't used in years, a contact at the district attorney's office who specialized in civil rights violations and systematic harassment cases. It was time to stop playing Melinda's game and start playing by rules she didn't understand. Because what she didn't know was that she'd just challenged someone who had spent his entire career dealing with people who thought they could abuse legal systems to get their way. Game over, Melinda. You just picked a fight with the wrong retired government worker. Wednesday morning brought Deputy Wilson to our door again, but this time his expression was different, more serious, more official. "Mr. Redford, I need you to come down to the station for an interview regarding the complaint filed against you." I could see Eleanor's face go pale from the kitchen doorway. "Am I under arrest?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "No, sir, but we need to follow proper procedure when allegations of threats are made." I grabbed my documentation folder. Hospital records, security footage, timestamps, credit card receipts, and medical staff contact information. If Melinda wanted to play the false accusation game, I was prepared to win it decisively. The interview room at the sheriff's department was exactly what you'd expect. Fluorescent lights, metal table, and the kind of uncomfortable chairs designed to make people want to confess quickly. Deputy Wilson looked genuinely uncomfortable as he set up his recording equipment. "Mr. Redford, I have to ask about the phone call Mrs. Caraway claims you made on Tuesday afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. I slid my documentation across the table systematically. "Deputy Wilson, as you can see from these hospital records, I was with my wife Eleanor during her medical emergency from 1:30 until 6 p.m. Here are the security camera timestamps, credit card receipts, and contact numbers for medical staff who interacted with me during the time frame in question." Wilson reviewed each document carefully, and I could see the realization dawning on his face. "Sir, this is a very solid alibi. Mrs. Caraway claimed you called her at 2:30 p.m. specifically." I leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, feeling oddly relaxed. "Deputy Wilson, what Mrs. Caraway has done is file a false police report. She's alleged criminal activity that demonstrably did not occur, with easily verifiable evidence proving her allegations are fabricated." Wilson stopped the recording and looked at me directly. "Mr. Redford, can I ask what you did before you retired?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I worked in state government for 30 years, specializing in legal compliance and regulatory enforcement." The deputy's expression shifted to something approaching respect. After the interview concluded, Wilson walked me to the parking lot. Away from official recording equipment, he was more candid. "Sir, I've been responding to calls from Mrs. Caraway for over a year now, most of which turned out to be baseless." He glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard. "I've been documenting every call, every complaint, every interaction. The pattern is problematic." I thanked him for his professionalism and drove home, but my mind was already working on the next phase of this situation. Thursday brought the news I'd been expecting. Melinda had filed for a restraining order, claiming reasonable fear for personal safety based on threatening behavior patterns. The court date was scheduled for the following Friday, and she'd requested an expedited hearing due to imminent danger concerns. I read through her petition, which was actually impressively written. She'd crafted a narrative painting me as an unstable individual who'd become increasingly aggressive when confronted about community safety issues. She'd included edited video footage, selected witness statements, and a timeline of alleged escalating behavior. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her story myself. Eleanor was devastated when I showed her the restraining order petition. "Graham, how can she just lie like this? How can she make up things that never happened and get a court to believe her?" I sat down next to my wife, taking her hands in mine. "Honey, she can file anything she wants, but filing a petition doesn't make it true. And I have something she doesn't have: actual evidence." I pulled out my growing documentation file: photos, videos, timestamps, witness statements, medical records, and most importantly, legal precedents. She's about to learn the difference between making accusations and proving them in court. That evening, I received a call that changed everything. My contact at the district attorney's office had reviewed the materials I'd sent regarding Melinda's harassment campaign. "Graham, this is textbook systematic harassment through abuse of legal process. We've got false police reports, frivolous complaints, organized intimidation campaigns, and invasion of privacy. If you want to proceed with formal charges, we have enough evidence to prosecute." I looked across the room at Eleanor, who was reading quietly in her favorite chair, finally looking peaceful for the first time in weeks. "Let's do it," I said, "but I want to handle the restraining order hearing first." I spent the weekend preparing for court methodically and comprehensively. Every video Melinda had made was evidence of harassment. Every complaint she'd filed was evidence of abuse of process. Every public confrontation was evidence of intentional infliction of emotional distress. She'd been so busy building her case against me that she'd actually built a perfect case against herself. I organized everything chronologically, cross-referenced with witness statements, and prepared exhibits that would tell the complete story of her harassment campaign. My former colleague at the State Attorney General's office confirmed what I already knew. "Graham, what you're describing is a federal civil rights violation. She's used government processes to systematically deny your right to peaceful enjoyment of your property." We talked for 2 hours about legal strategy, precedent cases, and the kind of damages that typically resulted from systematic harassment campaigns. By the time I hung up, I had a complete legal strategy that would end Melinda's harassment permanently. Thursday evening, I sat in my home office, surrounded by evidence boxes and legal files. Eleanor brought me coffee and looked at the organized documentation covering every surface. "Graham, are you sure about representing yourself? This seems like a lot to handle." I pulled her onto my lap, careful of her still tender treatment sites. "Honey, I've been preparing for this fight my whole career. I just never expected to be fighting it from this side." Tomorrow, Melinda Caraway was going to learn what happens when you systematically harass someone who knows exactly how to document and prosecute harassment. Friday morning arrived with crystal clear autumn weather that makes everything seem possible. Eleanor insisted on coming to court with me. "Graham, I want to see this finished. I want to watch you end this nightmare so we can get back to living our lives." We arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early, and I immediately noticed Melinda had prepared for another media moment. She was dressed like she was attending a corporate board meeting: navy blue suit, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of confidence that comes from believing you're absolutely right. The courtroom filled quickly with neighbors from Sunset Ridge, a few local reporters, and what appeared to be members of Melinda's extended family. She'd clearly positioned this hearing as a community event, probably expecting a quick victory. The judge called the court to order precisely at 10 a.m., and Melinda's attorney immediately began presenting their case. "Your Honor, Mrs. Caraway seeks protection from an increasingly unstable neighbor whose threatening behavior has escalated to the point where she fears for her personal safety." They presented their edited video footage, selected witness statements, and a timeline of alleged threatening incidents. Melinda herself took the stand with dramatic flair usually reserved for television courtrooms. "Your Honor, I've tried to be a good neighbor and address legitimate community concerns through proper channels. But Mr. Redford has responded to reasonable requests with hostility, intimidation, and ultimately threats of violence." She described our interactions in vivid detail, painting me as an aggressive property owner who'd become increasingly volatile. Her performance was convincing, emotional, and completely fabricated. When she finished her testimony, I could see several neighbors nodding in apparent sympathy. When the judge called for my response, I stood up slowly and walked to the defendant's table with the kind of calm confidence I'd learned in 30 years of government hearings. "Your Honor, before I address Mrs. Carraway's allegations, I believe the court should know exactly who they're dealing with." I paused for effect, looking directly at Melinda for the first time all morning. "I am Graham Redford, retired federal judge for the Northern District of Texas, with 30 years of experience in exactly this type of case." The courtroom went completely silent. Melinda's face went through several expressions: confusion, realization, and then something approaching horror. "Your Honor," I continued, opening my first evidence box, "what we have here is not a case of threatening behavior. What we have is a textbook example of systematic harassment through abuse of legal process." I methodically presented the timeline of Melinda's harassment campaign: the initial contact, the escalating demands, the coordinated complaint strategy, the public intimidation campaigns, and finally the false police reports. Each piece of evidence was documented and presented with systematic precision. Mrs. Carraway has engaged in a deliberate campaign to force my family from our legally purchased property. The judge reviewed each exhibit carefully, while Melinda's attorney frantically whispered with his client. I could see the realization dawning they'd brought a harassment case against someone who'd spent his career prosecuting harassment cases. "Your Honor, the evidence shows that Mrs. Carraway has filed multiple false complaints, organized public intimidation campaigns, and ultimately filed a false police report with easily disprovable allegations." I presented the hospital records, security footage, and timestamps that proved her police report was fabricated. This is criminal harassment disguised as community activism. The turning point came when I presented the medical evidence of Eleanor's stress-induced health crisis. "Your Honor, my wife is undergoing treatment for stage 3 lung cancer. Mrs. Carraway's harassment campaign has directly interfered with her medical treatment and recovery." I showed the court photos of Eleanor's collapse at the grocery store and medical records documenting stress complications. The judge looked genuinely disturbed as he reviewed the medical documentation. When I finished my presentation, the judge addressed Melinda directly. "Mrs. Carraway, not only am I denying your petition for a restraining order, but I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of false reporting and systematic harassment." He turned to me with something approaching respect. "Judge Redford, do you intend to pursue civil remedies against Mrs. Carraway?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Your Honor, I've already filed a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit against Mrs. Carraway and the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association." The real drama happened after we left the courthouse. Word had spread through Sunset Ridge about the hearing outcome, and by that evening an emergency HOA meeting had been called. Deputy Wilson stopped by our house around 8 p.m. with news. "Mr. Redford, the HOA board voted tonight to remove Mrs. Carraway from all positions. They're also considering dissolving the HOA entirely to avoid legal liability." The next week brought a cascade of consequences for Melinda. Criminal charges were filed for false police reporting and harassment. Her expensive attorney withdrew when she couldn't pay his retainer fees. She was forced to put her house on the market to pay for legal defense. The for sale sign went up on Tuesday, and by Friday, a moving truck was loading her belongings. The white Range Rover with the COM 1T license plate drove past our ranch one final time, captured by our trail cameras as it disappeared down the highway. Eleanor's health improved dramatically once the stress was removed. She started spending afternoons on our porch again, watching the deer come to drink from our pond. "Graham," she said one evening as we watched the sunset, "I'm glad Melinda picked a fight with us. Not because I wanted conflict, but because now I know we'll never have to deal with anything like this again." 6 months later, an elderly neighbor approached me with a leather-bound journal documenting everything Melinda had done to other families in the neighborhood. The journal contained detailed records of harassment campaigns against 3 other families, ensuring Melinda faced serious legal consequences. As I write this, Eleanor and I have been living peacefully on our ranch for over a year. The cancer treatment was successful, the HOA was officially dissolved, and our former neighbors have become genuine friends. Melinda moved 3 counties away, bankrupted by legal bills. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but when it comes completely. If you're dealing with a neighborhood bully who thinks they can abuse legal systems to get their way, remember this: document everything, know your rights, and never underestimate the power of fighting back with truth, evidence, and the law on your side.